continues to work on it up to today. There has been a lot of activity lately. Religious right groups such as Alliance Defending Freedom urge pastors to openly break the law. And President Donald Trump has vowed to, quote, entirely, quote, totally destroy, end of quote, the Johnson Amendment. Trump even issued an executive order that he claimed achieved that goal. But the Justice Department, his own Justice Department, later admitted that the amendment remains in place. Sometimes Trump forgets he's president. He's not king. Republicans in the House of Representatives tried to insert language greatly weakening the Johnson Amendment into last year's tax bill. But the provision did not appear in the Senate version or the final bill that Trump signed into law. AU remains alert because there could be another attempt to undercut the amendment in Congress. Of course, that won't happen because now the Democrats are going to be taking over the House. An important part of AU's strategy is to rally clergy to defend the Johnson Amendment. Clergy are reminding Americans that partisan politics is not the job of the religious community, and pointing out that the amendment protects the integrity of houses of worship. Issue: religious right attacks gay and lesbian, bi, transsexual rights. What years do I cover? The 1970s to the present. What happened? The rise of the religious right as a political force presented new challenges to the church-state wall and Americans united. These theocratic groups had a wide-ranging agenda. While much of their work focused on getting their dogma taught in private schools, as in the 1980s, progressed, it became increasingly obvious that many religious right groups were determined to roll back rights that were being won by the LGBTQ communities. The early religious backlash to gay rights was led by people like singer Anita Bryant. It was severe. Some proposals were downright vicious. In 1978, a far-right state legislator in California won a spot for a ballot initiative that would have barred gay people and anyone who supported gay rights from teaching in the public schools. I want to go back over that. In 1978, a far-right state legislator in California won a spot for a ballot initiative that would have barred gay people and anyone who supported gay rights from teaching in the state's public schools. The measure was rejected. The vote was 58 to 42%. 58 to 42%. What bothers me is 42% of the voters in California agreed to that amendment, which would have banned gay and lesbian teachers or those who support them from teaching in the state's public schools. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to name any names. I know a number of gay teachers who now or did teach in the Worcester public schools. They never said they were gay or whatever. No one ever knew they were, and they were great teachers. But if this law had passed in Massachusetts, they never would have been allowed to teach. Luckily, it was in California. it was defeated. In the face of ugly, anti-gay rhetoric by figures like Jerry Falwell and TV preachers like Pat Robinson, Americans United began working to highlight the connection between LGBTQ rights and church-state separation. AU argued that U.S. law should not be based on theology and that the religious right had no business policing sexual activity between consenting adults. In October of 1999, Church and State, our magazine, published a lengthy article titled, quote, "The Religious Rights Gay Agenda," end of quote, which exposed how religious right groups used homophobia and anti-gay hysteria to raise funds and mobilize support. After the turn of the century, the issue of marriage equality started to gain traction in some states. Same-sex marriage began to gain traction in some states. Massachusetts recognized it in 2004 after a court battle. And we've had it ever since. Same-sex marriage in Massachusetts since 2004. And the state has not collapsed. Religious right groups were alarmed and mobilized to press states to pass laws or amendments to their constitutions, stating that valid marriages can exist only between one man and one woman. A number of states adopted such provisions. The issue moved to the federal courts, which invalidated a number of anti-marriage equality laws and amendments. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4, and that's the danger, 5-4. But now the court is quite different than what it was in 2015. That measures banning marriage equality violates the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. Americans United filed a brief in that case, Oberfeld versus Hodge, pointing out that much opposition to marriage equality is anchored in theological beliefs. AU challenged opponents to articulate, to give a secular reason why same-sex couples should not be permitted to wed, and they couldn't do so. Just give us one argument. They couldn't do so. In the wake of the ruling, AU responded to claims by the religious right that the clergy would be forced to marry same-sex people. No. Clergy are not forced to marry same-sex couples. We pointed out that under the First Amendment, religious leaders have an absolute right to decide which couples they will marry. If some members of the clergy don't want to marry same-sex couples, they don't have to. If some want to, they can. It's up to them. They still have that right. Where are we now? AU remains active in the issue of gay, lesbian, and transsexual rights. More recently, the organization has opposed efforts by religious legal groups that are arguing that owners of for-profit businesses and government clerks have a right, based on religious freedom, to refuse services to members of the gay, bisexual, lesbian community and others. A major case dealing with this issue is a case that was called the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. And the court has come down with a decision, which is rather strange. The vote was 5-4 to say that Masterpiece Cake Shop does not have to bake the cake, but the decision still leaves the issue open. Because what happened is that when the Colorado Civil Rights Commission took this up, some of the members made comments that showed they were not neutral when it came to matters of religion. Because they were not neutral, when they struck down Masterpiece Cake Shop and said they had to make the cake, because they had said this when they were on the commission, that's why Masterpiece Cake Shop won the case. But what the court was saying, the issue could come back to the Supreme Court, and if it was not biased against religion, the case could be taken up again. So the point of the matter is that while Masterpiece Cake Shop won the case before the Supreme Court, if the same case comes up under different circumstances, the results might be different. So there really is no final decision on that. Both sides, by the way, claim victory in that confusing decision. The next issue. An Alabama judge promotes the 10 Commandments. The years were 1997 to the present. What happened? In the late 1990s, Roy Moore, maybe you heard about that name, Roy Moore, later ran for the U.S. Senate and was defeated. U.S. Senate. At the time, in the late 1990s, Roy Moore was a state judge in Alabama. He came to American United's attention when he attempted, with absolutely no legal justification, to interfere in one of our lawsuits. Now, he was a state judge. He was trying to interfere in one of our lawsuits that we had filed in federal court, challenging the public schools' practices in Alabama that promoted conservative Christianity. AU also became aware that Moore was displaying a hand-carved 10 Commandment monument in his courtroom. He had religious symbols in his courtroom. Moore used the media ruckus that came after that to make his name known statewide and win election as the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court in 2000. Once on that court, he arranged for a 2-ton 10 Commandment monument to be displayed in the judicial building in Montgomery, the capital. Representing local plaintiffs, citizens who lived in Alabama, Americans United, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Southern Poverty Law Center sued Moore in October of 2001. 2 federal courts ordered him to remove the religious display, but he defied the ruling. He refused to do it. In 2003, he was removed from his position by the Alabama Court of Judiciary, an oversight body, because he would not remove the monument after he was told to do so by the U.S. Supreme Court. What happened? He won re-election because the judges are elected in Alabama to the state's highest court in 2012. Remarkably, he began engaging in open defiance of the Supreme Court of the United States. In 2016, the same Judicial Oversight Board body again suspended him from the High Court after he told judges in the state to ignore the U.S. Supreme Court's decision of 2015, affirming marriage equality. Where are we now? He later ran for the U.S. Senate in 2016 as a Republican. He was badly defeated. So where are we now? Portraying himself as a victim, Moore has become something of a hero to the religious right. In 2016, he attempted to ride that infamy into the U.S. Senate. As I already said, he won the GOP primary for the seat formerly held by U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions, who is now Attorney General of the United States under President Trump. And he was named Attorney General by Trump, former U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions. And so Moore ran for that seat. Given Alabama's heavy Republican leanings, many political pundits, I call them talking heads, expected Moore to beat his Democratic opponent, Doug Jones, in the December 12th special election. But Moore was battered by allegations that he had sexually harassed and assaulted teenage girls when he was in his 30s. Does that sound somewhat familiar about an issue on the Supreme Court being judged to the U.S. Supreme Court today? But allegations were out there. It's a special election, and Moore lost by about 21,000 votes. So he lost. It's a close election. Lost by 21,000 votes, but in one of the reddest states in the United States, that in the election of 2016 voted by a huge margin for President Trump. Always a sore loser. Moore hasn't conceded. Jones was sworn in January 3rd in that special election. But Judge Moore, it would seem, is finished in Alabama. The next issue. Pat Robertson devises a partisan plot. The year was 1997. What happened? Television evangelist Pat Robertson, founder of the Christian Broadcasting Network, had long been a high-profile opponent of church-state separation. Over the years, he has called that constitutional principle a, quote, lie of the left, end of quote, a, quote, Soviet stricture, end of quote, and a, quote, myth, end of quote. But Robinson did more than just talk about that on TV. He formed a legal group, the American Center for Law and Justice, to undermine church-state separation in the courts, and a political unit called the Christian Coalition. Robinson's coalition claimed to be a non-partisan outfit, but it was closely aligned with the Republican Party. In 1997, the group held its annual conference in Washington, D.C. And during this event, Americans United secured a tape recording of Robinson speaking to supporters in a closed-door session. Robinson asserting that everyone within earshot was a coalition sympathizer outlined a highly partisan political scheme to merge the coalition with the GOP and control the party's presidential nominating process in the year 2000. Robertson boasted having told Don Hodel, the coalition president, quote, my dear friend, I want to hold out to you the possibility of electing the next president of the United States, because I think That's what we have in this organization, and I believe we can indeed elect the next president of the United States. The TV preacher in 2000 went on to compare the coalition to the infamous political machines such as Tammany Hall in New York City and the Byrd machine in Virginia, telling attendees, quote, they had an identified core of people who had brought into the values whatever they were, and they worked the election and brought people out to vote. The other people were diffused, divided, and fragmented, and they lost, and the people that had the core won. I mean, it isn't complicated, but this is what we've got to do. End of quote. Said that in a closed meeting of religious leaders in the year 2000. Aware that his comments were controversial, Robinson insisted he was speaking in the family. He added, quote, if there's any press here, would you please shoot yourselves? Leave. Do something. The end of quote. Americans United released copies of the recordings to the major media outlets, and the story ran in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, CNN, and other outlets. It was a significant embarrassment for Robinson, whose spokespeople were left scrambling to explain the tape's explosive content. Where are we now? Robinson eventually pulled his support from the Christian Coalition, and the group shrank into irrelevance. Its place was taken by the Family Coalition, the American Research Association, other groups. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope to do another show. And if I do, and when I do, the issue then will be a Pennsylvania public school system pushes what's called intelligence design. The year will be 2005, and I'll tell you about that. But right now, we've won these battles in the court, but now there's a new president, there's a new House of Representatives controlled by